Teck, the Canadian mining giant, is merging with Anglo American to create a global colossus in the copper sector. What does this mean for Canada, for our economy, for our free trade discussions with the United States? To help break it all down, I'm joined by Sean Speer, my co-founder and editor at large. Well, Sean, this story caught our eye certainly over the last 24 hours. Let's get your top line reaction to seeing Teck merge. We can talk about, is this really a merger? Is it a takeover? What is it, and how will the government react?
Yeah, as Hub listeners and viewers know, intersection of the economy and politics is our sweet spot, and this plays on both. From an economic point of view, it's a huge merger, represents the largest ever in the mining sector, and Teck is a big player in Canada. It's a big player generally, but of course, it's really an anchor company in Vancouver and in British Columbia. And so there's going to be a lot of attention paid to this announcement and what it means, not just for Teck employment and Teck's headquarters in Vancouver, but all of the auxiliary or secondary effects of Teck's place in the British Columbian economy. And then, as you say, Roger, we'll get into it. There's the inevitable role of politics. Industry Minister Melanie Joly has announced that this transaction is indeed subject to her review under the Investment Canada Act. And while that review is supposed to be technocratic, considering things like national security or whether it's a net benefit when it comes to employment and investment and so on, having spent time in Ottawa going through precisely these types of cases, I can assure our audience that politics is part of it. So from that point of view, big economic story, potentially a big political story, and bucking up against some of the bigger issues that we've been talking about at the Hub: economic nationalism, protectionism, the changing world of geopolitics. This is a big deal for Canada.
Great point, Sean. I guess there's two that I want to make. First, follow the money. If you look at the terms of this deal, yes, Teck shareholders get a nice percentage of the shares of the new combined company, but Anglo American shareholders get more. And more importantly, the listing, where the stock trades, its primary market origination is no longer on the TSX. It is moving to the London Stock Exchange. So yes, while the headquarters will remain in Vancouver, there's a lot of cautionary tales out there of similar type mergers that eventually see those headquarters go away, that they see those headquarters end up following the listing decisions. I think, for example, of Barrick Gold. At one point, the world's largest gold miner, headquartered here in Toronto, ended up in a similar type of merger arrangement. Its listing was moved overseas to London, and sure enough, a couple of years later, effectively, the company is run out of London and not out of Toronto, and we've lost yet another global champion. And I think I can count probably on one hand now the number of companies in any sector that is a global champion. And I think Teck, at least in terms of copper production, zinc production, could make a bid that it is one of Canada's few remaining mining global champions. So I worry about this, Sean, that we have to look at this deal in the kind of cold light of day and understand, is it a merger or is this a takeover? I think over time, we might see it heading in the latter direction. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll come to some of those second observations in a minute, but on your point, Rudyard, about trying to read between the lines to understand the steady state nature of the merged companies, important. That's precisely what Melanie Joly and her officials are going to be doing as they review the transaction under the Investment Canada Act. You may recall, Rudyard, that under the Act, it says a lot of things. Ultimately, the government makes a decision based on whether the transaction's a, quote, net benefit to Canada. And there's not a lot of details on what constitutes a net benefit. That is ultimately at the discretion of the minister. And so I think one of the challenges with trying to interpret this transaction is it's been presented with an audience, of course, to markets, but also the audience of policymakers. So we see it being characterized, as you say, as a merger of equals, even though Anglo American shareholders will own, almost twice as much of the new company as Teck ones. It talks about the headquarters remaining in Vancouver, while Anglo American is boasting about an increase in staff complement and spending in London. Their a commitment that there won't be job losses in British Columbia, but they also boast about all of the cost savings that are going to be generated by the transaction. So, one of the complicated questions that policymakers all have grappled with for a long time is whether the net benefit test ought to be more prescribed, whether there should be greater details around how we ultimately make that judgment. Successive governments have left that discretion ultimately up to the minister. And so she's going to kind of weigh these different pros and cons to make that judgment. And in the past, Roger, this is the point I want to make, since the Investment Canada Act was passed in the 1980s under Mulroney, for a long time, it was seen as essentially a rubber stamp. It wasn't designed to block investment. It was designed to facilitate investment. But really, for the past 10 or 15 years, that has changed. And in that sense, I think it would be imprudent to make a bet right now on whether this transaction is ultimately approved, notwithstanding the positive story that Teck and Anglo American are telling Canadians and telling the government.
Yeah. Well, it's important to note that Anglo American is a British-owned company. My point about Trump is that we don't know our relationship with the United States. We don't know what we're going to be called upon potentially to give up or trade with. There's been a lot of talk about Canadian mining and natural resources being a key part of any kind of future deal with the Americans. So how do you think, Sean, that could work into decision makers in Ottawa's kind of lens over this deal? Yes, it's a British company, so maybe the politics are a little bit different. We want to be friendly towards Britain right now because we need more friends internationally. But at the same time, is it the moment to effectively put into play, again, one of the last big Canadian headquartered mining companies in a series of important minerals like copper, zinc, into play when we don't know exactly where we're headed with the Americans? I don't know. My sense is like optionality is mission number one, job number one at this moment, and it makes me a little bit nervous to be giving up this kind of crown jewel of Canadian mining, because I think you follow the money. If the listing is moving to London, the energy and onus and future of this company is not in Canada. And again, I go back to the story of Barrick to prove that point.
Yeah, well, this is where I was going to go next. Thank you for permitting me to talk a bit about the Investment Canada Act, because I think it really is interesting and obviously fundamental to the government's review of this particular transaction. But everything you just set out is at the backdrop of the review, particularly, Roger, the increasing focus on critical minerals, not just as an economic output, a source of economic output, but as a strategic asset for Canada, both with respect to its relationship with the United States, where in recent years we've actually seen the U.S. Department of Defense invest directly into Canadian mining projects because they see those mineral inputs as crucial to the economic and national security interests of North America. And then, of course, some of these broader issues that we're talking about. So I think it would be naive and a mistake for the government not to have an eye towards the broader Canada-U.S. negotiations and the extent to which Teck's complement of mining projects and mining assets are actually a big part of what we bring to the table in our kind of continental relationship with the United States. Just one other point, and then I'll turn it back to you, and that is the place of politics. We're living in a moment of economic nationalism, for better or for worse. We're certainly living in a populist moment. Historically, as I said, the conservative parties were seen as generally pro-foreign direct investment, generally in favor of the Investment Canada Act. But in recent years, we've seen actually the conservatives at different points call on the Trudeau government to use the powers under the ICA to block transactions. And so, well, of course, the minister is going to be looking at all of these factors, employment, investment, geopolitics, etc., she's also going to be responsive to politics. You can take that for granted. And so, as an interesting as it is to see what she and other members of the government are saying in response to this transaction, I'm looking closely at what Pierre Poilievre and the conservative members say. If they come out opposed to this, it will make it difficult for the government to approve it. And so one can't help but think that yes, Teck is presenting the transaction in the most positive terms vis-a-vis the government, but I sure hope at some free government relations advice that they're dedicating as much time to the official opposition, because I think in the current political environment they're going to have a disproportionate voice in how the government is thinking and talking about this particular transaction.
Yeah. Well said, Sean. I'm glad we were able to break this down with you today. It's a consequential merger. We'll see where it goes. There may be other bidders. There's rumors that Glencore and others, could try to outdo the Anglo American offer. Teck is in play. We'll have to see where it's headed, both in Ottawa and on global markets. An important economic story, and terrific to be able to catch up with you on that today. This video has been brought to you by Airbnb. A big thank you to Airbnb for sponsoring the Hub's YouTube channel this month. It's great to be the beneficiaries of their support. Here at the Hub, we talk a lot about the housing crisis ongoing in the country. As we know, there are people out there that think that short-term rentals are to blame for taking supply off the market, but here at the Hub, we can feel that doesn't make sense. Consider for a moment that the median number of nights an Airbnb is hosting someone in Canada as a guest is 55. These, frankly, aren't full-time rental properties. They are Canadians trying to get by like the rest of us by finding some additional income through renting out a property they own. Government data supports this. Statistics Canada recently reported the amount of Airbnbs that could actually be converted into long-term homes accounts for only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs solutions to tackle the whole housing market, not just 0.6% of it. We agree. Learn more at airbnb.ca/closer look.